So a couple of days ago, I put a new track on Bandcamp, zenglop.bandcamp.com, and the piece is called "Hands Made Perfect." It's hands, like hands made perfect, and I call it a contrafacta on Elvis singing Unchained Melody. Now, that's kind of a misuse of the word contrafacta. Contrafacta means the replacement of one set of words for another, keeping the same tune. So it could be a filk, or a folk song, a well-known folk song. You might write words for that well-known folk song. But I liked the sound of it, contrafacta. And what I was doing with the piece was taking a sample of Elvis singing in performance and then modifying that recording using a lot of tape techniques that are represented in the Morphagene, the Make Noise Morphagene. So I'm not replacing the words, but I am replacing the gestures. Or I'm using the existing gestures to form new related gestures. So Hands Made Perfect, contrafacta. I thought I would take a few minutes and describe the basic techniques that I used in the Morphagene, the behaviors of this module that formed the foundation of the piece, right? Like, so the Morphagene is really cool. In some ways, the Morphagene, the existence of the Morphagene, is what got me into modular, because I've always wanted to work in the style of or inspired by those early studio pieces by people like Colin Stockhausen. One of the first pieces that I was really inspired to compose by was Omaggio a Joyce by Luciano Berio. These are all pieces that were done with tape, slicing and dicing. Okay, so let's just start with the sample, and I have it in two long sections, and I'll just to give you a start.
My darling, I've hungered for your touch a long time.
So that goes on about the first minute, and then I have a second splice, right? You can see I've shifted to
Time goes by so slowly, and time can do so much. Time.
Right, so two splices, both about a minute, one from the beginning of the piece and one from the end. One of the things I don't do in this piece is take advantage of the ability to splice very, very small sections and then shift between them rapidly, either through this shift gate or through the organize button. But I just have the two. And I'd explored rapidly shifting between the two because it does create its own effect. But I decided that for the piece, that as it turned out, I really just stayed with one and then the other. So I didn't use splice. The other control within the Morphagene that I did not use, right, is the slide. And the slide, if you imagine a piece of tape and a tape head, the tape head moving, slide refers to where the tape head would be on the tape. So think of it as the starting point of the sample. So I'm going to move the slide, and you'll hear every time I move the slide, it starts again, and it starts at a slightly different place. So here's starting from the beginning, and then I'm going to just slide it up and down so you can hear what it sounds like.
Darling, oh my love, I heart of
So slide works really well with in combination with the gene size, which is something that I did work with a lot. So the gene size is the size of the sample, if you want to think of it. If you have a splice, you can change the start point within the splice, but the gene size is then how much of that you're going to play at once. So over on the left here, we would play the full set, and then as I turn it, the gene size gets smaller and smaller. So let me demonstrate that for you. You hear it come in and out like there's an envelope applied to it. That's actually one of the new features of the latest firmware update that I implemented just before I started playing with this, where it shapes. You have the option to have a hard cut between them. I like that wavy sound. But now listen, if I go to a shorter repetition, so you can hear sort of like a burst of it, and then change the slide, you can hear an interesting effect. Again, not one that I used, but an interesting effect.
My love.
The effect that I used the most in this piece, in the Hands Made Perfect, was this idea of clocking the Morphagene. And the clock input, you can send any gate in, then it will do, each of the different controls will respond differently to that. But what happens with the gene size, when you clock it, it will move through the piece to the next gene that you've set. So different from the start point, right? Where with slide, where you're affecting the start point. In this case, with the clock, it allows you to move through, and every time a clock signal comes in, it'll shift to the next gene. This is kind of a rough way to demonstrate it, but I've got my sequence here, and every time I hit a button, it's going to pound a gate out, and then it will shift through. So I actually ended up using one of the burst from the Wogglebug to do it. But let me just do that again and be. So if I do that again with a much shorter gene size. So I did it with the Wogglebug, and I set the Wogglebug to start with, at least nice and slow, with a relatively long gene size. But actually those were things that in the piece I morphed, like I changed the gene size over time.
I hunger I heart, I heart.